Hey everyone, I'm Mary Davis and I'm here with Astrid Bowlby, my friend, members of the Garden Club, and we're going to talk to you today about the Garden Club's 2020 donations to the Belfast Free Library. Astrid and I are honored to be the co-chairs of this important and I would say somewhat under the radar contribution to the community made possible through the hard work of the Garden Club members during their two major fundraisers, the plant sale in the spring, which this year is June 6th, and their weekly open garden tours held most Fridays in the summer. Astrid has a seasonal plant nursery in Brooks, which specializes in Maine natives and unusual annuals, as well as rock garden plants. I am a lifelong collector of antique gardening books, and for a decade, I sold vintage and antique books on eBay. We are finding this Zoom format a bit stilted from how we usually chit-chat back and forth with each other, so we ask you to forgive any flubs we make along the way. We are delighted to be the co-chairs of this committee, and we're new to the role, but follow a long tradition going back 20 years. In that time, the Belfast Garden Club has donated 167 books to the library. I recently heard from a club member that the Belfast Free Library had one of the best collections of gardening books in the state. I thought this might be a stretch, but how lucky am I if it was true? So I decided to test that hypothesis by doing my own research for the word garden in the Minerva library system and selected a few libraries in the well-off towns in Maine. I invite you to do something similar and compare the book collections. In Belfast, I ended up taking out 3 books I had heard about and wanted to read, and the other 2 libraries I looked at had really nothing to offer. So I feel I can say it is my opinion that the Belfast Free Library does have one of the top-notch collections in the state, and I thank previous book donation chairs for putting that together. Astrid and I have some overreaching goals for the books we hope to add to the library. There are quite a few scientists in the Garden Club, and we hope to include in each purchase a book that will call to them. Some members are artists, and we will always be on the lookout for books that display the beauty of the earth. Other important categories we're interested in are project or hands-on based books, maybe gardening with children, cooking from your garden, or perhaps making dyes from plants. The books we selected for 2020 range from inspirational garden design, eco-restoration, biology, history, biodiversity, cooking with table scraps, and the first book we present is Uprooted by Paige Dickey, which is an autobiography. Paige is a well-known author of 8 books on gardening. She wrote a column in the magazine Horticulture, which I think was called The View from Duck Hill, that some of you might remember. I originally selected this book because, with a few exceptions, all members of the Garden Club have come from somewhere else and, like Paige, uprooted their lives and sometimes their gardens to come to Waldo County. So while I picked the book for that reason, I ended up adding it to our list for an entirely different reason. I thought in this book I would find someone like me who lamented on leaving her garden behind and how could one possibly start over again. But she did not validate my mantra of leave no plant behind, nor even offer my sons advice, which was, Mom, you cannot save them all. But I did my best and I moved 400 plants to Belfast. Paige, on the other hand, left her garden with a stiff upper lip and did not wax poetic or regret that the new garden would not support every lilac and peony that the old garden had. And when her garden was bulldozed by the new owner, as was mine, she offered no condolences or perspective on how to suffer through that because she did not suffer. And that was my lesson learned from the book. I did find that she and I were simpatico in that our new land with different challenges changed us as gardeners. Her garden had been formal with clipped boxwood and roses, and now she gardened in a less formal way in meadows and woods. On my land in Belfast, there was no place for my English-style cottage border that I previously gardened, so I plunked down those 400 plants in my front yard and called it a no-mow design. What I did take away from this book was a long list of plants I wanted to incorporate on my new property, and I kept a pen and paper by my side to note them as I read. I would recommend this book to a plant snob, so if you would prefer yellow snowdrops to white and would covet a black and blue salvia, then this book would point out some interesting selections for you. There were also a couple of specialty nurseries that she mentioned, and we will talk more about those in our Readers and Weeders group, which you're all invited to in February. Now Astrid will introduce you to two books she selected by Judith Swartz. The library already had this author's first book, Cows Save the Planet, so now we will have her entire writings.
Thanks, Mary. Just to let the audience know, I'm reading from a script sometimes, and so I'll be looking down a little bit. I'll try to keep it to a minimum. I suggested Judith Swartz's two books of essays, Water in Plain Sight and The Reindeer Chronicles, because they offer optimism about human ingenuity, as well as concrete, clear information about on-the-ground solutions to building soil health, cooling the planet, restoring ecological diversity, cleaning water, and sequestering carbon in the soil. These issues are very important to me as a gardener, nursery owner, and of course as a human. The subjects may sound a bit dry and boring, but Swartz is an excellent essayist, and she knows how to tell a good story. Her writing reminds me a bit of John McPhee's. As a pioneer of creative nonfiction, he too has written evocatively of weather, geology, landscape, and human ingenuity. In Swartz's thorough and approachable essays, daunting global issues such as polluted water and drought are viewed through the lens of specific local solutions. She travels around the world to highlight eco-restorers who are affecting change in compromised, damaged landscapes, including in the United States. The term eco-restorer was new to me, and reading the essays has prompted me to ask some questions. How can I be an eco-restorer? What might that look like in my own community? How can I help support water, soil, air, and creatures, including my neighbors, right here in Midcoast, Maine? When we dig a bit deeper into these books during our Weeders and Readers sessions later this winter, I'll share some of my thoughts and ideas about being an eco-restorer. Meanwhile, the human love of nature and our efforts to understand what we are seeing using science, poetry, and philosophy have a long tradition. So let's move back in time 230 years and examine the next acquisition.
Yes, The Metamorphosis of Plants by Johann Goethe was originally published in 1790 and originally in German. I found this book so beautiful, I could not find words that could describe it, and present here more photos than the other books we're going to be talking about. I literally washed my hands prior to picking up this book each time I had to open it. It is so stunning that I gave it to our previous club president, Bonnie Irwin, as a thank you gift for her service. So I discovered this book at the Old Professor's Bookshop in Belfast, and I did leave behind a few copies there, which, by the way, are encased in shrink wrap. But I went to Amazon to learn how other readers would convey the beauty of this book, as I found it hard to put into words. I could not give a synopsis better than this reviewer, so I'm just going to read what he said. This is a beautiful book for anyone interested in our relationship with nature. It is a book that you must own, not borrow from the library, because it needs to be read over and over again. It is similar to a meditation. The photographs are stunning and will lead you outside to your garden to look at the forms described in nature. In this day of Kindle and PDFs, you still need to touch this book. Another reviewer goes on to say, inspired by the diversity of flora Goethe found on his journey to Italy, he sought a unity of form in diverse structures, and he came to see in the leaf of the plant the germ of a plant's metamorphosis from the root and stem, leaves to the calyx and corolla, to pistil and stamens. This would later become known as the foliar theory. With this short book, 123 numbered paragraphs in the matter of the great botanist Linnaeus, Goethe aimed to tell the story of botanical forms in process, to present, in effect, a motion picture of the metamorphosis of plants. While the text is scientific, it is not full of jargon and you won't lose interest. In my own simple words, this book can only be described as art meets science. In enjoying the photographs, you will learn how amazing it is to study flowers from inches away. I enjoyed the book's prompting to study my plants and flowers close up and upside down, and not just admire them from 5 feet 5 inches off the ground. I think sometimes we are so busy with chores in the garden that we don't take time to reflect on what this or that plant is doing and how it might have changed from the day before. And this book will help to assist you in that understanding. So from small to big, here is Astrid to talk about the first of our 2 children's books we purchased. And I have to say, Astrid, this is the biggest book I have ever seen.
Thanks, Mary. A Big Garden was also written by a scientist with the heart of an artist, Gilles Clement. Excuse me. Clement is a garden designer, botanist, and entomologist. And like Goethe, he is encouraging us to get down on our hands and knees and look at things really closely. His writing is good with a few quibbles. One, for example, is the use of the pronoun he throughout to represent the gardener when they could have easily been substituted without ruining the text. And that is something that is interesting to talk about and think about, the pronouns and how they intimate who might belong in the garden and who's doing the work. So it's something that is important to me. However, when you see the illustrations, you will understand immediately why we had to get this into the library. The watercolors that are at the heart and soul of the book are by Vincent Gravé. I don't know much about him yet, but I'm looking forward to learning more. The book is 24 pages, and each spread represents a month of the year, beginning with May. I want to hold it up so you can see the size, but I forgot to bring it upstairs with me when we started recording. However, if you had a kid on one side of you and a kid on the other, and you opened the book up, it would span all 3 laps. It's really wonderful. This gives Gravé a room for a lot of detail, as you can see. Not only are the illustrations lush and charming, they are also funny. One could make up their own stories using these drawings, or have fun trying to find all the hidden animals and wacky antics that the gardeners get up to. Gravé uses scale to great effect in these pictures. The gardeners are tiny and the world is huge. I felt like these thoughtful visual choices deepened my experience of the book a lot. I also like the text very much, except for the pronoun issue. And although it is not a text-heavy book, the sentences have weight and the potential to open up discussion and initiate opportunities for running outside and looking at things. For example, the entry for August in part reads, "The forest of flowers is a blossoming meadowland, as seen from a rabbit's perspective, or even that of an ant. Everything seems strange when seen up close with a detailed, fixed gaze. The gardener often gets close to the ground, and he sometimes sticks his nose into the flowers. But his eyes are not designed to perceive the world as rabbits and ants do. He therefore has to imagine he is a rabbit, an ant, or even a ladybug to recognize the exact map of plant species in this meadow." Okay, by now we should all be running outside, crouching in the grass with the ants and the ladybugs, trying to experience their point of view. But first, Mary has another children's book selection to introduce.
All right, so I selected this book because of the author, Julian Lennon. And I just knew the writing and the poetry would be great. And so it's called Heal the Earth by Julian Lennon. And although the format isn't as large as Astrid's book, Heal the Earth is still a nice size for story hour. It has the important message of loving our planet and each other. And each page has a power button which engages the children to think about the story on the page. The large illustrations bring adventure. They teach geography, care, love, and respect to our planet as well as each other. A first grade child should be able to read this book on their own and probably memorize this beautiful poem that's at the end of the book. And I think you'll hear John Lennon in this poem. It says, "There's a dream I often dream of trying to perfect a scheme to teach us all to change our ways and help the world see better days. Heal the earth bright and blue, a chance for all to start anew." And now Astrid's next selection is a book that will teach adults on how to heal the earth.
Thanks, Mary. Yes, and to start anew, definitely. So Nature's Best Hope, a new approach to conservation that starts in your yard, is by Douglas Tallamy and is definitely a book about how adults can heal the earth. And there are lots of activities that children can engage in as well. At its core, this book is all about baby food. Provide the trees, shrubs, and perennials that baby insects need to eat, and you provide the bugs and caterpillars that birds need to feed their own babies. If you know you want to do something to start being the eco-restorer I referred to from the Schwartz essays, then begin with this book. It is an excellent step-by-step guide to upping the habitat in your yard, increasing biodiversity, and most importantly, it eloquently and scientifically lays out the why of each activity. And the reason why you need the why is that Tallamy is not only asking you to make some changes in your own yard, hill strip, or roadside verge, he is asking you to convince others to do it too. His project is called Homegrown National Park, and you can go to homegrownnationalpark.org and check it out. The concept is that small individual actions lead up to significant change. Did you know that 83% of the land in the United States is privately owned? If we planted native plants on just 50% of that land, we would restore the biodiversity to our country. This is huge. We are losing insect and bird populations at alarming rates. No insects means no bird food, and no insects means no pollination. No pollination means no people food either, unless we all are willing to start hand pollinating the crops that the human world needs with little tiny paintbrushes. The beauty of the concept of the Homegrown National Park is that we don't need to wait for institutions or government agencies to get with the program. Anyone with a yard, or frankly, with a big container that has holes in the bottom, can begin. We can connect all our little personal habitats into one big homegrown national park. This book makes both the scientific and emotional case for fecund diversity centered around nurturing native flora and fauna. And it lays out the steps. Here are some of them: turning off the lights at night, providing even a little water feature, planting in layers, leaving seed heads, reducing lawn, etc. What this book does not do too much of is discuss aesthetics or provide plant lists. However, there are many other excellent books that do that, like Planting in a Post-Wild World by Thomas Rainier and Claudia West, and we're planning to get that into the collection next time. Also, the book that Mary is going to introduce next would be a good companion to Nature's Best Hope, as it discusses the mixing of natives with beloved garden favorites, as well as the aesthetics of lush, plant-centered design that is so important to increasing biodiversity in our gardens, while also offering visual beauty.
Yes, so this book just came out in the fall, and it's entitled Modern Cottage Garden, A Fresh Approach to a Classic Style by an author, Greg Lodes, that I'm not familiar with, but I would recommend this book to someone who is starting a new garden or wants to bring in more new types of plants. The story that a modern cottage garden tells us is that a garden can incorporate the new plants of sedges and grasses that are more eco-friendly than previously Gertrude Jekyll might have used lots of annuals in her British garden. The design is unrestrained, and if you don't like a messy look, there are quite a few pages on containers. Back to what Astrid was mentioning, you don't have to have a big garden to be biodiverse. The new cottage garden is designed for 4 seasons of interest, which the cottage gardens of 1880s, and I would even say 1980s, were not. The book states that the only maintenance required in this type of garden is to cut it down with a string trimmer in the spring. It doesn't mention that you might want to pick up those what's left behind, but maybe you should leave it on the ground to shade out the seedlings that are for sure going to pop up. I do think without the editing of those volunteer seedlings, the garden will take on a chaotic look, and the plants that are thugs will take over, and you're going to lose the diversity of your garden. One plant that the author mentioned is sea holly. And while the electric blue is the delight to me and bees, it is pretty much a solid carpet in the area of my garden. And there's nothing wrong with drifts, and that is a great look that can take years to achieve. But for me, being a collector, I need that space for my next new favorite plant. And this book does list 50 must-have plants for the new modern cottage garden, and we'll go over those in February at our Readers and Weeders Zoom. So this new type of garden is more like a meadow with flowers, I would say. And in fact, there is a chapter on Pete Udolph's meadow perennial garden in Yorkshire, United Kingdom. The focus in this design is on texture. Again, as Astrid mentioned, the seed heads for wildlife, although I felt that the book was more about design and sort of gave short shrift to the wildlife aspect of this type of garden. This will peak later in the year as it focuses on the 3 sisters of Helenium, Rudbeckia, and Salvia. I personally like that focus because so much of my garden, the flowering splash is gone by August, so I really appreciate having those plants in my garden. A comment on Amazon said that this book was best read by a new gardener. And as I mentioned, I don't find that at all. I think it has some good ideas. And if you are wanting to incorporate grasses or cultivating a new area of your garden, I definitely think you should give this book a read. We're going to switch gears here from gardening to farming. One is perhaps a hobby and the other more a livelihood, but really, as Astrid and I talked offline, these 2 groups really are more sisters than they are not. And the book is Farming with the Wild, Enhancing Biodiversity of Farms and Ranches by Daniel Imhoff. This is a signed copy from my personal collection. Astrid and I have decided from time to time to gift a book from our personal collection to the library, and I picked this one for its unusual topic. We as gardeners often talk about biodiversity of our landscape as it relates to plants and insects, but this book takes a broader view and includes 4-legged wildlife in its definition of biodiversity. Here, the focus is on farming in a sustainable way by including wildlife as part of the ecosystem. It shows how balance can be achieved in making a living off the land while maintaining a healthy biotic community with a certain ecological consciousness. The goal is to have every act of consumption produce an act of production, which is a tenet of permaculture, which is another area we look to beef up in the library. The author visited 19 farms going from, in Maine, Elliott Coleman and Barbara Damrosch's, to the Sky Island Wildlife Network in Arizona. It discusses the difficulty of protecting federal lands where wolves and jaguars jive for habitat against the grazing practices of cowboys. So a program was put in place that embraced the cowboys as rangers in a citizen science type of way and asked them to report on what they were encountering. Another farm he visited was on the US-Mexico border, where bee boxes were set up and maintained hedgerows for wildlife habitat and introduced a program of rotating where the livestock grazed. The bee boxes ended up being home to 1,200 different species of native bees, and the wild edges of the hedgerows created a habitat for predators and prey. The coyotes ate the rabbits instead of the farmers' melons, and the hedgerow not only helped soil erosion, but the wind blockage and provided shade enjoyed by the livestock. One farm called Shoulder to Shoulder sits on a 55-acre parcel near the foothills of Oregon. The farm is the antithesis of monocrop farming. It has a complex array of insectary crops, hedgerows so diverse that it is hard to locate the gourmet lettuce crop that is the farmer's mainstay. This farmer complains of a lack of diversity in the seed we plant and how its characteristics are likely selected for shipping fortitude and herbicide resistance rather than the merits of taste and adaptability to local growing conditions. It's hard, he says, to make a living as a farmer, as the wide amount of diversity in your crops is so labor intensive. Mechanical seeding and harvesting is geared towards the huge monoculture enterprises. But what farming on this scale has done for the farmer is the opportunity to find diversity amongst his lettuces because he's getting in the garden daily and close to the soil as he hand weeds. This had the benefit of selecting beautiful lettuces and growing them out for seed for commercial purposes. Their organic seed company is Wild Garden Seed. And if you join us in February, I will show you some amazing photos of his lettuce. Other farms that were visited were an Appalachian food forest. He tells the story of how a dairyman in Minnesota creates diversity and how bats are being used against bugs in California. Basically, in the end, this book asks the question, what would Mother Nature do? And the answer is restore the landscape into balance. So if we are tired of the mice in our garden, we might figure out a way to encourage possums and skunks to take care of them for us. And if you are tired of weeds, you might want to consider eating them. But Astrid's going to talk about other aspects of weeds.
Thanks, Mary. I cannot wait to read that book. It sounds right up my alley.
Yeah,
I mean, so often I'm just trying to get people to think, oh, the edible part doesn't need to be separate from the nature part, which doesn't need to be separate from the cutting garden, and how to think about, you know, having a landscape that's just, you know, filled with plants in so many ways. So, Weeds of the Northeast, very interesting book. Weeds of the Northeast is a fascinating book for me for a variety of reasons. First, it is important as a reference book and a guide to identification of a specific set of plants. And we want the library to have more identification books. So there, it's on solid ground, and I'm really glad that it's going into the collection. But, and this is critically important, for me, it gets to the heart of some of the issues presented in the Schwartz essays, Tallamy's call to community action, even the modern cottage garden, and the book that Mary just talked about. I think the question for me is, who gets to call what a weed and why? Eating weeds, using them for medicine, using them for basket material, fabric, dye, using them for their scent and flavor, enjoying them because they're beautiful, bringing them into our homes for decoration, providing insect food, This all is exactly not what Weeds of the Northeast is about. If you were someone who was a groundskeeper for a golf course, you would love this book on one level. However, weed is not a scientific term. It is a cultural term. And it's often said that a weed is a plant in the wrong place. This is a very good reference book, but it was published in 1997, and I imagine if Cornell University published it today, some of these issues would be addressed in the text differently than they are in this version. Authors such as Richard Mabey from the UK have also written excellent books, giving a more rounded perspective to the plants we sometimes call weeds, and we hope to bring these into the collection as well. However, there are plants in the book that are poisonous to people or to livestock, or that are non-native and can wreak havoc where they are invasive, like Japanese knotweed. But there are also some perfectly lovely plants, like the native heath aster in the next photo. Doug Talmy and I will try to talk you into leaving this at the lawn edge, or even planting it in your decorative border. There is an entry on Bellis perennis, or English daisy, which is a low-growing, charming early bloomer you can find for sale at nurseries and garden centers early in the season. The photo of it in the book is supposed to be an indictment. However, who doesn't want a flowerful sward of little daisies flowing across an expansive lawn in the spring? Some other plants that get the weed designation are common milkweed, little blue stem, big blue stem, wild strawberry, riverbank grape, evening primrose, and Virginia creeper. The list goes on. I sell every single one of those native plants in my native plant selection of my nursery, and they all provide bonkers ecological services. My point is that we need to think critically about what we read, appreciate the useful information a book provides, and not be fearful of asking questions. No book is the be-all and end-all of a subject, and all books have a point of view. Now that I have convinced you to plant weeds in your garden, I hope, Mary is going to talk about a wonderful cookbook which will inspire you to look at your kitchen scraps in an entirely new light.
Right, and I thank Astrid for bringing this book to my attention. It was actually one that she selected, and I asked if I could review it instead of her because I just had to get my hands on it. If you reuse Ziploc, this is going to be a book you're going to want to have on your shelf. So it's been reviewed in the New York Times as well as on NPR. And when I looked on Amazon, there was only one copy. I know this book is going to be hot. And once it goes into the collection, I will never see it again. But it is just one of those books you want to hold and linger over. It is gorgeous. The page quality is glossy. The photos are stunning and gorgeous and could stand on their own as art. And it had an interesting introduction to me on food waste, which I didn't know, and I'm just going to cover it here a little bit. Food waste in the US is a big deal as 40% goes uneaten, which is about $162 billion worth of food going into the landfills. The waste of food happens at every step in the food chain, from blemished crops lying in the field that never get picked and go to market, to bruised plants or misshapen plants that can't be shipped. Others end up in the back of our refrigerator. As refrigerators got bigger, we ended up wasting more food as everything got pushed to the back of it. The large amount of leftovers might not make this book a good read for someone that's a single person, but all you have to do every time you cut your broccoli is just put it in that Ziploc bag. And once you have 4, there's going to be a recipe in this book that will tell you how to use them. It also goes into reusing your scraps using fermentation, drying, canning, pickling. Those are all ways to keep extra food from being thrown away. Beets were my favorite new vegetable this year, and I could eat the tops and the bottoms and not feel rushed to pull them out. So I was thrilled to find these beet recipes in this book. fire roasted beets, dried beets, beet chili sauce, beet crepes, beet salsa, and marinated beet leaves and beet pasta. It goes on to talk about carrot raisins, carrot top pesto, carrot salsa. So he tells you how to make vinegar from your apple cores. So keep those Ziploc bags handy. From celery bottoms to carrot tops, you're going to find recipes that will use your scraps in ways that never occurred to you. It's a cookbook that reuses the phrase with the true recycling spirit that one cook's trash is another cook's treasure. As someone who recycles almost everything, this book has made me rethink what goes to the crows and what goes into my compost bucket and what I can reuse for me. Pesto can be made out of almost anything. And I think when you finish reading this book, you'll be wondering, broccoli pesto or adding it to the soup? I encourage you to forage your fridge before ordering pizza and take a look at this book. There won't be many veggie scraps when you try some of these recipes. And now Astrid's going to talk about garden varieties that you might want to try this year.
Thanks, Mary. So yes, and all of the little bits and bobs left over from your main use of them can be used in the Scrap, Wilt, and Weeds book. Absolutely. Our final two books actually round out the selection in different ways. I haven't had the opportunity to read either of these books yet as they haven't arrived, but I'm looking forward to it. The first one, Nikki Jabor's Veggie Garden Remix, is by a longtime backyard farmer, podcaster, and garden writer who gardens in Nova Scotia in a zone even colder than ours. And she does it year round. I've read some of her other books and found them excellent, so I feel pretty confident in recommending this one. This book will expand your culinary repertoire, and it is a good one for even beginning gardeners, for beginning veggie farmers. And so many people last year started farming and gardening for the first time. Frankly, all of Jabor's books are clear, approachable, and inspiring for the home gardener. This one consists of 224 entries of different vegetables that you could possibly grow in your garden. It has detailed growing info, some history, a little bit of history, some fun facts about each edible plant. The photos and the way it's laid out look really great to me. You know, Mary and I wanted to make sure that we're providing good information on the how-to end of things in the library collection, and this book fits the bill for sure. Also, if you're a more experienced farmer, but you feel in a little bit of rut with your choices, this book has something for you as well. Now, last but not least, The Incredible Journey of Plants by Stefano Mancuso. This is our final selection for the 2020 book acquisitions for the library. This book is about wonder, surprise, and stories. It is about how plants get from one place to another. It is about seed dispersal through hitchhiking, pooping, and popping. It is about coconuts traveling the ocean, elephant gardeners, and other cross-species interventions, including human ones. It is about the problems created when seed is taken away and a plant can only be propagated vegetatively. This highly recommended, well-received book was written by a plant neurobiologist. Plant neurobiology is an amazing discipline that studies how plants communicate. It's really fascinating. And we need to get a book about that for next year. So that wraps it up. Thank you so much for taking the time to learn about the Belfast Garden Club's book donations to the library. We hope you will be inspired to check them out and share them with others. In addition to this introduction video, Mary and I will be hosting 2 Readers and Weeders events where we will do a deeper dive into some of these books, discussing the ideas, authors, and other related books and topics with audience participation. These will be Zoom meetings open to the public. There will be one on Wednesday, February 24th at 10 a.m. and one on Wednesday, March 24th, also at 10 a.m. For more information about the Readers and Weeders series and instructions on how to register, go to belfastgardenclub.org and click on book donations. We look forward to seeing you, and thanks again.